We talked about irony. We talked about situational irony, verbal irony, and dramatic irony. You need to know these kinds of ironies if you want to learn The Huntsman by Edward Whatberry. Loveberry. Right. Again, the subtopic I have given this poem is talking kills. Okay. So remember that. Again, just because you talk, you won't die. But there is something you can learn from this. The main technique is irony. Okay. Mainly situational. Situational irony is what you have to learn from this poem. Okay. We know about the poet Edward Lowbury. Don't study or don't memorize anything about the poet, only memorize his name. Edward Lowbury. That's all you need to memorize, nothing else. Don't memorize his birth year, how many wives he had, how many children he had, where he studied, what was his mother's name. Don't waste time, only memorize his name. That's all we want. He was an English medical bacteriologist. A bacteriologist is a kind of a researcher, a doctor who studies or who does research about bacteria. Bacteria. And he's a pathologist. Pathogens are bacteria that cause what? Diseases. Pathogens are bacteria that cause diseases. So he was a pathologist and a bacteriologist. So when he was free, he wrote some poems. He spent many of his years in Kenya. If you take the story of Huntsman, it's a Kenyan folklore. The story behind Huntsman is a Kenyan folklore. Again, it's a very beautiful presentation because I want you to learn this properly. The next half an hour, this presentation will be over. Before we start reading the poem, there are 5 stanzas we must read. We must talk about the organization. What organization, baby? Organization. Because in the analysis, you should tell the reader everything about the poem. You should talk every single thing about the poem without leaving anything behind. Talk about the number of stanzas. Talk about the lines per stanzas. Talk about there are 6 lines per stanza. Then talk about that the poem is a story. It depicts a story. A third person narration. That means one man is talking about another man. That's a third person narration. And then the theme, very important, is humor. Okay, the theme is humor. Let's move forward. And then we have what play? We have word play. What's word play? Hey, not playboy. I know some of you people, you said playboy. No, word play. Word play means basically the techniques, the literary, the techniques. What are the techniques the poet has used? Humor through exaggeration or humor through hyperbole. Simple diction. What's a simple diction? Simple words. What's a dictionary? What's a dictionary? Dictionary is where you find words, right? A dictionary like this. A big dick. I have a big dictionary. Have you seen my dictionary? I have a very big dictionary. If you want, I'll send you a photo of my big dictionary. Right. So like I was saying, it is a diction means words. So simple diction means simple words. It's true. Poems of humor uses very simple words and the ideas are very easy to understand. Raise your hands up if you have read Jacques Préveur's Breakfast. Raise your hands up, my friends, if you have read Jacques Préveur's Breakfast. Right, many of you, hundreds of you. Now tell me, if a 5-year-old or a grade 5 child reads Jacques Préveur's Breakfast, will they understand the story? Husband and wife are about to get a divorce. They are separated. Husband doesn't love the wife. Will a grade 5 child understand? No, they will not. They will think the poem is about coffee and breakfast. The poem is about eating and drinking coffee. No. Breakfast is a poem of what flict? Conflict. The idea is very hard to understand. Even though the words are easy, is the poem easy to understand? No, the poem is not easy to understand. Simple diction, but it's very hard to understand. Breakfast. But Edward Lowbury's Huntsman, even a grade 5 child, if you have a small Tangachi, Tambi, if you have a small Malliya, Nangiya, you can show them the poem Edward Lowbury's Huntsman, and you will understand that the poem is very easy to understand. There's a humorous tone. It evokes satire, not flat tire. Okay, satire. What does satire means? Talking about negative qualities of humans using humor. Okay, satire is talking about negative qualities of humans using humor. And then we have a heavy moral lesson. There's a heavy lesson we can learn from the Huntsman. Utilizes repetition. We talked about repetition, we did not talk about, but repetition means repeating same thing again and again. Alliteration, adjacent words starting with the same sound, and then situational irony is also found in the wordplay. There's heavy punctuation, right? Heavy punctuation in the poem. Now, when there is a line, for example, there's a line like this, okay, in the poem, there's a punctuation mark in the middle. We call that a caesura, 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 usually out of syllabus. But remember, if there's a punctuation mark, my friends, you can stop and you can read, right? You can stop and you can think. That is the effect of a punctuation mark. Okay, so remember, there is heavy punctuation, there is a caesura. If there is a heavy punctuation, you can stop and you can read. However, the main character known as Kagwa, what was Kagwa, he does not stop and think. He can't stop and think. The main character named Kagwa does not stop and think. Ironically, if the main character would have what? Stopped and thought. What is it again, my friend? If the main character would have stopped and thought, he would still be alive. There's a lesson you can learn from this poem, okay? Don't talk without thinking. Stop, think, then talk. Stop, think, then act. Let's move forward. So here, had Kagwa realized this, he would have not suffered a gruesome fate. Enter the brave Kagwa. Kagwa is brave. How do we know he's brave? Because Kagwa is a lion hunter. We'll start reading the first stanza. Kagwa hunted the lion through the bush and forest went the spear. One day he found the skull of a man and said to it, "How did you come here?" The skull opened its mouth and said, "Talking brought me here." Now you should think about it, okay? Remember, and by the way, the green color, it indicates what is the technique? Vowel sounds. Talking brought me here. They are what? Assonance, adjacent words beginning, having vowel sounds inside of them. Okay, now what happened is Kagwa is brave. Why? He can hunt a lion. If you can, now can I hunt a lion? I'll run. He is brave because he can hunt a lion. So Kagwa is not like a Sottipala, not like an old man, right? He is a very strong warrior. He's a brave warrior. Through bush and forest went the spear. Kagwa did not throw the spear. The spear is a long javelin. Kagwa didn't throw his spear. The spear went. Spear go. Spear. Towel go. Towel go. Will the spear go? What's the technique? Giving human qualities to non-human things. It's called personification. Went his spear is personification, giving human qualities to non-human things. And then one day he found a skull of a man. Look at this, the poet, he's telling us that there was a skull, not of a lion, not an animal skull, but a man's skull, and said to it, "How did you come here?" That's a rhetorical question. Okay, we did not talk about this. A rhetorical question, because there are many techniques to talk about. 1-2 hours are not enough. So that's why I recommend you join our class, learn all of these techniques, get an A for your literature exam. So he says to the skull, he asks from the skull, "How did you get here?" So then he did not expect an answer. Okay, when you talk to a skull, will the skull open its mouth and talk, right? Imagine I'm talking to this bottle of, I don't know, this is Pangiri. I don't know what you call this in English. Anti-mosquito spray. All right. I talk to this. Will this talk to me? Right? No, right. Will this talk to me? No, no, right. As I was saying, this will not talk to me. And I did not expect that, right? So Kagwa did not expect the skull to talk, but the skull talked. If you expect something and the opposite thing happens, what do we call it? What irony? Situational irony. For example, the fire station is on fire, right? The policeman is guilty, the judge is guilty. Situational irony. You eat a banana, throw the banana peel, and you slip and you fall down in the banana peel that you threw down. That is a good example for situational irony. So here he asks the skull a rhetorical question, but the skull opens his mouth and says, talking brought me here, and tell me here, is it a good place or a bad place? Is the skull in a good place or a bad place? It's in a forest. The body is missing. The flesh is missing. The skull is setapochi. The skull is dead. So the skull is in a bad place. Kagwa should have thought, the skull is here because the skull talked. I should think carefully and I should not talk. But what happens? Remember, the poem revolves around the acclaimed hunter, Kagwa, a brave warrior or hunter named Kagwa. The story revolves around him. And then Kagwa has successfully hunted a lion, which depicts his bravery. It shows that Kagwa is brave because the lion is a symbol of bravery. So if Kagwa is able to hunt a lion, Kagwa is brave. And then his spear went. So giving human qualities to a non-human thing is known as what personification? Personification. And also remember, I taught you about anthropomorphism, right? Anthropomorphism, but I told you it's out of syllabus. That the skull is really talking. Kagwa's skull is really talking to him. That is a anthropomorphism. But because it is out of syllabus, we will say it is personification. The rhetorical question which was asked from the human skull had gotten an answer. This is ironic because what Kagwa expected, he got the opposite outcome. When he asked the skull a question, he did not even dream that the skull will talk and answer. He was surprised. What he expected, the opposite thing happens. It is situational irony. What does the skull say? How did you come here? The skull opened its mouth and said, talking brought me here. And then the talking skull is anthropomorphism, I told you, but remember, my friends, anthropomorphism is out of syllabus. We use what personification, baby? Personification. And then, hence, the talking skull is personification, like I said. And remember, the skull, is it a beautiful thing? Is it like a pleasant thing? When you have a girl, will you give us the skull for a girl? No, right? It's a symbol. It's a symbol of death. The skull is a symbol of death. The Grim Reaper. The Grim Reaper is the angel of death. The angel of death that comes and takes you to heaven or hell. The Grim Reaper. And also, note that the word here is in the skull's reply, right? Talking brought me here indicates the skull's situation, death. What's the skull's situation? The skull is dead. So then Kagwa should have thought, okay, if I talk like this skull, even I must die. But Kagwa did not think about it. If Kagwa would have realized this, he would not have suffered a gruesome fate. The second stanza, Kagwa hurried home. What's the technique? Very quickly, alliteration, baby. And then went to the king's chair and spoke. In the forest I found a talking skull. Again, alliteration. The king was silent. Now, there's a very clear technique here. It's known as juxtaposition. It's known as juxtaposition. The king is silent and Kagwa is talking loudly. There's a heavy juxtaposition, heavy difference. The silence of the king undercuts Kagwa's enthusiasm. Kagwa is talking. Kagwa says to the king, in the forest, I found a talking skull. The king is silent. The king was silent. Then he said slowly, Never since I was born of my mother have I seen or heard of a skull which spoke. So here the king is a very slow speaker, but he has a huge authority above Kagwa. He's silent. He says to Kagwa, I have never heard of a skull ever since I was born. Stanza contains heavy alliteration. Silent said slowly, my mother's skull spoke. Those are all waterations, baby. They are alliterations. And also, hurried home, forest found. Silent said slowly, my mother skull spoke. And remember, they are alliterations, and spoke is repetition. If you look at that properly, the word spoke is repeated twice. That is a repetition done on purpose. And then the king's silence is juxtaposed with Kagwa's anxious chatter, complimenting on the morale. Senseless talking is injurious. If you talk without a reason, if you talk without thinking, you will become injured. You will lose a lot of things if you talk like an idiot. Talking skull is an oxymoron. I told you. How can a skull talk? It's an oxymoron. How can there be a talking skull? It's an oxymoron. So remember, two contradictory ideas. If you put them together, they become a oxymoron. Not oxypura, sexymoron. Who's sending me those messages? Where two contradictory ideas are placed together. The morale is talking kills. Or remember, talking without a motive or proof may get you in trouble. Senseless talking is troublesome. That's what you can learn. Kagwa's astonishment, surprise, is heavily undercut by the king's unenthusiastic reply. This indicates that the king is unhappy with Kagwa. The king is not at all happy with what Kagwa had done. The king called out his guards. Called out. Called out. That is a assonance. Adjacent words with vowel sounds. Two of you go now with him and find this talking skull. But if his tale is a lie and the skull speaks no word, this Kagwa himself must die. Words like now, words like this Kagwa himself, these show that the king is urgent. Also remember, skull spoke is an alliteration. The O sound is an assonance. Lie and die are end rhymes. End rhymes. End rhymes. Lie and die. Right? They are words that rhyme and they are in the end of a line. This technique, adjacent words beginning with the same, adjacent lines beginning with the same word, is known as anaphora. You can also say repetition if you want. But usually we say anaphora, but remember again, anaphora is out of syllabus. Almost done, okay? Like two more stanzas left. And also, what else? Do you see, the king sends how many people with him? Two of you go now. Two of you. The king is trying to teach us a lesson. The king here is trying to teach us a lesson. Note that the king even outnumbers Kagwa. The king doesn't send one guard with Kagwa. The king sends two guards, not 100. Okay, is there a use of sending 100 guards? No, the king only sends two guards because the king knows the moment Kagwa gets caught, these two guards are enough to kill Kagwa. The king doesn't waste his guards. The king uses a simple idea. I'll tell you what that is. Note that the king even outnumbers Kagwa, paying homage, paying respect, reminding to the old cliche. A cliche is an overused piece of advice. Paying homage to the old cliche, two is better than one, right? So what is a cliche, by the way? I told you it is a overused advice. In this case, how about this? Never judge a book by its cover. What's the poem? Richard Cory, right? Edwin Arlington Robinson. Money is not happiness. Also Richard Cory. That is also by Edwin Arlington Robinson, obviously. Talking is silver. Silence is gold. That is from The Huntsman. These are good examples for cliches, overused pieces of advice. They are known as cliches. And then we have anaphora. Anaphora is when you find the same word in adjacent lines. And here are anaphoras. And here are very good anaphoras. And then once you get the tutorial, you can read this. You can send me a message and get all of these tutorials for free. You have my number. I will share my number again in the end. I told you, remember, 2 is better than 1. What I'm telling you what the king told, right? The king sends 2 guards. That's why 2 is better than 1. If you were given the option about for 1, and if you were given the option for 2, you should select 2 because 2 is better than 1. Another example, Kagwa is only 1 person. There are 2 guards here. They overpower Kagwa. Kagwa has no chance with 2 guards. And then, what is Kagwa's punishment? Setapochi. Kagwa must die. Kagwa's punishment for his stupidity, for his incompetence, is death. That takes us to, and also remember, 2 of you. Now, this Kagwa himself shows that the king is urgent, shows the king's urgency. The king is a man of few words, thus the king needs actions. The king wants to see actions, not words. Sadly, Kagwa only has words. They rode into the forest. Who rode? Kagwa and the 2 guards, right? Kagwa and the 2 guards. They rode into the forest. For days and nights they found nothing. Remember, found nothing. How can you find nothing? What's the technique? 2 words, they contradict each other. What's the technique? You guys know it is what? Oxymoron, baby. They are oxymorons. That's the technique. 2 words, they contradict each other. They are known as oxymorons. And then remember, the for and the for and these are known as assonance. For days and nights they found nothing. At last they saw the skull. Alliteration. Kagwa said to it, "How did you come here?" The skull said nothing. Remember, how can you say nothing? That is also an oxymoron. There is another technique you can find here. Repetition. Repetition. The skull said nothing. Kagwa imploded. Kagwa begged. He begged the skull. But even then the skull said nothing. What do you think happened to Kagwa? We are done. What do you think happened to Kagwa? Kagwa was Setapochi, dead. They found nothing is an oxymoron, and also skull said nothing is also an oxymoron. Though the skull is found after days and nights of searching, the skull does not talk. This creates a pathetic situation. Also, it shows situational irony. Kagwa thought the skull would talk, but in the end, the skull did not talk. What do you expect? The opposite thing happens. What irony is it, baby? Situational irony. The pathetic situation is elucidated with the wording implored. Repetition of the skull said nothing intensifies the pathetic situation. The final stanza. The guard said, "Kneel down." They killed him with sword and spear. Sword and spear is an alliteration. By the way, Kagwa killed a lion with a spear in the beginning, and now he's killed with a spear in the end. That is also situational irony. When Kagwa killed the lion with a spear in the beginning, did he think, okay, in the future, I will be killed by a spear? Did Kagwa think like that? No, he didn't. Then the skull opened its mouth. "Huntsman, how did you come here?" And the dead man answered. So there are 2 words that shows us that Kagwa was actually killed. One, the word killed is here, and then dead man. Who is the dead man who was killed? Kagwa. Because sometimes the reader might think, okay, Kagwa might be injured. No, Kagwa is surely dead. But now there's a role reversal. The skull asks Kagwa the same question he had asked the skull in the beginning. "Huntsman, how did you get here?" "Talking brought me here." The dead man answered, confirms that Kagwa is dead. and not injured. Down is a symbol of failure. He was asked to kneel, not up, but down. And also, it is a ironic effect. Why? Kagwa killed a lion in the beginning with a spear, and now he is killed with a spear. Situational. Motivational, baby. Situational irony. Kagwa's death is effortless and quick, indicating little value for his life. There was another death in your syllabus. Effortless death. What was that death? And one calm summer night, Richard Corey put a bullet in his head. Effortless death shows that life is not important. Kagwa's life was not important because he did not know how to control his mouth. He talked and then he thought. He did not think and speak. Remember, speaking is silver, silence is gold. That is what you can learn from the huntsman. Like I said, the ending is ironic due to two reasons. The skull only talks after Kagwa's death. The skull asks the same question asked by Kagwa in the beginning. The irony is heightened because Kagwa mirrors the skull's initial reply. The skull asks Kagwa what Kagwa asks the skull in the beginning, and also Kagwa replies how the skull replied to Kagwa in the beginning. Talking brought me here. That is the end of the huntsman. Remember, this establishes a role reversal, and role reversals, teacher teaching the student, judge going to jail, they are also situational irony. We are done successfully. We are over with our presentation. There are some questions you can do by yourself. Exactly, the time is 10 o'clock. As I promised you, I have taught you many literary techniques of how you can use real life examples, and you can remember, you can memorize, and you can study literature. Like I said, my friends, we are remaking history. We are working hard, and hard work